Hello and welcome to the Kick Sugar Summit, the world's first summit on the topic of sugar, sugar addiction, and sugar addiction recovery. We know that if we're going to reverse our rising rates of chronic disease, we need to reduce or eliminate our consumption of sugar and refined carbohydrates. We are here to help you do that. There are a lot of speakers on our summit and a lot of information. Don't get overwhelmed. Catch who you can and just let the rest go. Alternatively, you could purchase one of our Summit VIP packages, which comes with an awesome ebook summarizing the core insights of each speaker, a year's worth of resources from our world of experts, and access to a whole year of weekly drop-in live Q&As with me, Florence, your host. Thank you for being here. I hope you love the summit, and I hope it changes your life. Welcome, everybody, to the Kick Sugar Summit. I have with me Amy Berger, who I'll read you her bio. She probably doesn't need an introduction. She's well known. She's an author of 3 books, and she has incredible expertise in the low carb and keto community and a great reputation as someone who knows her science and has waded through it and made it accessible. But I'll share her formal bio. She is a U.S. Air Force veteran, a certified nutrition specialist who helps people do keto without the crazy. That's her code word. She writes about a wide range of health and nutrition related topics such as insulin, weight loss, diabetes, Alzheimer's, thyroid function, weight loss, etc. She is presented internationally on these issues and is the author of the Alzheimer's Antidote, The Stall Slayer, and co-authored End Your Carb Confusion with Dr. Eric Westman. She is the lead nutritionist for Adapt Your Life Academy, where she helps create course content and coaches people through implementing low carb diets safely. She's also helped create the American Nutrition Association's Ketogenic Nutrition Training Program curriculum and is on the BCNS Exam Review Committee, which writes a credentialing board exam for certified nutrition specialists. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I need a shorter bio.
It's a lot. It's very impressive. So you've been sort of at this for 15 years. No, tell me, how did you get into this? How did this become your life's work?
I got into this the way a lot of people do. I came in through my own personal need for a low carb diet. I struggled with weight my whole adolescence, my whole young adulthood, and I found the Atkins diet. That was how I started in this. I read the Atkins book and I tried it and it worked. Now, I didn't stick with it the first time, and I think that's also true of a lot of people. We have to try it a few times before it sticks permanently. But after a while, it took a few years actually before I made this my permanent lifestyle. But it worked, and I enjoy it, and I can maintain a weight that I'm happy with and good health through eating delicious food. And I was young enough when I found this that I didn't have a lot of health problems. Like I didn't really have any health issues at the time, but I have no doubt that if I hadn't found it when I did, right now, if continuing on the trajectory I was on, I probably would now have obesity. I might have diabetes. I might have PCOS. And just as a professional in the field, even though I started it personally for weight loss, I am just so fascinated and encouraged by all the other things, we call it carbohydrate restriction, of what this way of eating can do for so many, different things in the body, physical health, mental and emotional health. It's just endless. And basically, I went back to school to get formal training in nutrition because I was in and out of a lot of jobs that I just was not fulfilled by. And I realized that, nutritionist is a career. I could actually help other people learn about this phenomenal low carb diet. So that's what I did. And here I am.
Is this too personal to ask you? Did you discover it in your 20s and 30s? Like how young were you when you had this transformation?
I did. Yeah. I was actually in college when I learned about the Atkins diet. I was a senior in college. And that's probably part of why I didn't stick with it at first. I wouldn't say I was too young. You can do this at any age, but just my lifestyle. I think I wasn't prepared to just stop eating so many things that were staples of my diet at the time that I just ate every day. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't really stick until my mid-20s maybe. But I always knew that it existed, that it was a thing. And I would say even when I wasn't really following low carb, I was probably eating a lot less carbohydrate than I was previously, just because the seed was already planted. But I certainly wasn't in ketosis any of that time, when I was not really following it. And yeah, but I am lucky to have found it as young as I did. That's for
Oh
sure.
my gosh, yes. I have total envy. Mind you, truth be told, I read the Atkins book in college too. I did a 2 week low carb thing, never felt better. Like I have a photo of me and I'm like, I've never had a photo like it. Like my skin's glowing. I don't know what it was. It was a massive, but I didn't stick with it. Yeah, it just was, yeah. Oof.
But that's okay. Let's let to everybody watching, that's okay. If you've tried it and gotten off and tried it and gotten off, that's okay. Keep trying. It will stick eventually.
Yeah, totally.
I think most of us have that experience. I think it's rare that somebody finds this and just does it and never looks back.
Right, totally. A lot of face plants before before we stick it. Is there anybody in your experience of all these years that you haven't seen thrive on a low carb for any reason?
Yeah, actually, I have had clients for whom I recommended to start re-increasing carbohydrate intake. And those are usually people who did well on strict keto for some period of time. They lost weight or they felt better, some issue cleared up, but then they reach a point where they just don't feel well anymore. They're fatigued, or if they're athletes, they're losing strength and power. Things are starting to just go backward. And I would say that's the population I find it most in, is very athletic people. And before anyone, calls the keto police on me, you can absolutely be highly athletic on a very, very low carbohydrate diet. Lots of people are doing it, but that doesn't mean that everyone everywhere is going to feel best that way. Some people just feel better and perform a little better with a little bit more carbohydrate. And I'm not talking 200 or 300 grams a day, but just a little more than you would eat on a strict ketogenic diet. And maybe not even every day, maybe a few times a week, they have a potato or some rice or some other starchy type of food. And it just, again, is that required? No, but some people just feel better with it.
And I have interviewed so many people, and I've heard that over and over. People who work on the front line will say that's absolutely true. The first person I heard it from was Julia Ross, and she's like, I've worked with 30,000 people over 30 years, and I'm telling you now, there are people that fall along a continuum, and I will get them to eat low carb, and eventually they just introduce a little bit of carbohydrate, whole foods, lots of, veggie based, blah, 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 like good quality stuff. And they go, oh, I feel better.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people to know that, because we're professionals, and so when we're working with somebody, we're going to get a lot more information from them and really tailor our advice versus advice doled out on social media from strangers. And the advice is so often, well, if you don't feel well, you're not doing it right, or you must need even less carbohydrate, or you need to do carnivore, or you need to eliminate this, when sometimes the answer really is they actually just need a little bit more carbohydrate.
Mhm.
And we've almost gone, not almost, we have gone a little too far in demonizing carbohydrate as a whole. Carbohydrate foods are not poison. And we don't need a randomized clinical trial to tell us this, because we have billions of healthy, lean people around the world who eat carbohydrate. So I do think there are some people who feel better not on ultra strict keto. As powerful as keto is, and we know it is, there are some people who just, it's not best for them.
Absolutely. And it's such a relief for people to hear that you can work with your own body. As long as we're talking whole foods, you can figure out what the macro ratios are that work best for you, which is what we try and stay out of in the summit. I don't want to get into the diet wars. This isn't vegan versus keto. It's really ultra processed foods versus the whole foods, and which ones work best for you. So carbs aren't poison, but sugar's a poison. What do we need to know about sugar, Amy?
Where do I start? Well,
It's maybe start with impact on the brain and cognition, because that's definitely an area of expertise for you.
Yeah. So I think sugar, how do I say, the sugar is really just a fuel. It doesn't really give you anything but that. Now, in a carbohydrate food, depending on what the food is, you will get vitamins and minerals and other things. But the glucose itself, the sucrose, really, if we're talking about table sugar, the sucrose itself really doesn't have anything of redeeming quality except that it provides energy. And for some people, there are those select few people out there who can eat a sweet, a pastry, whatever, and just have a little bit and they're satisfied and they just move on with their day. And then there's a much bigger swath of people who, for whatever reason, whatever biochemical things get triggered in the brain and in the whole appetite signaling system, we eat a small amount of that and then we want a huge amount and then we want even more. We crave it all day long and we're riding up and down on that blood sugar roller coaster. And in the short term, it feels great. In the short term, it gives you a little pick me up, it's a little dopamine hit. And then over the long term, when we do this over and over and over, and we maybe exceed our body's capacity to deal with that, we start having all the problems that so many people have now, the type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, PCOS, non-alcoholic fatty liver, all of these things that basically come from excess carbohydrate.
Mm-hmm. And in particular, would you say in particular the processed ones that are no longer whole food versions, or would you make a distinction between whole food carbohydrates and the ones that we've pulled fiber out of and processed? And
for most people, yes, for most people, but there are some people who, I hate that the word triggered isn't really appropriate, but for whom even whole pieces of fruit or a sweet potato or parsnips, for whom even those foods will trigger incessant cravings or constant thoughts of food. So for most, and in terms of blood sugar and insulin, from again, like general rule, for most people, the really refined stuff, especially liquid sugar in beverages, is going to impact blood sugar and insulin far more than a whole food with fiber. But they've, now that we have all these CGMs, they're doing more and more studies where people have very different responses to the same food. So two people can eat a candy bar or I don't know, a grapefruit and have radically different metabolic responses. So everybody wants a simple answer, but there isn't one. So that's why I say, for the most part, yeah, I do think those whole foods are going to be better and they are less likely to cause problems for people. But for some people have to avoid all of it flat out.
totally, I've seen it. So the CGM is mandatory part of my programs. Everyone wears one. I pay for it. And then we will literally compare our numbers. And I have a whole food plant-based woman, mostly. Occasionally she does some fish and occasionally she does some eggs, but mostly she prefers to eat more whole food plant-based. Her blood sugars are beautiful. They're totally in range 80% of the time. Whereas most of the rest of us, like if we had a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, we'd be in the 170s, 180s, 200s. And it's always touted as like the ultimate healthy grain. Well, if you're going to eat one grain, do oatmeal. And we start putting on our CGMs and we're like, OMG, beans, lentils, like chickpeas. And we're like, what am I doing in the 200s? It's so individual. Like you just don't know until you get that CGM on and kind of test for yourself. Totally fascinating how individual it is. Tell us a little bit more about Alzheimer's. And I know that's tied to diabetes and the overconsumption of these carbohydrates that we can't process. How does that impact our cognitive abilities long term?
Well, some people out there may already be familiar with this, but for those who aren't, and they being researchers in the scientific literature, they regularly refer to Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. And the major malfunction in the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's is that the brain is no longer properly taking up and utilizing glucose for fuel. So it's really a fuel shortage or an energy crisis in the brain. And the result, the symptoms of this underlying metabolic problem are the memory loss and the personality changes and the behavioral changes. That is not the disease. Those are the symptoms. The disease or the problem is this fuel shortage in the brain. When the neurons are not getting enough energy, of course you're going to have memory problems. Of course the way that you behave is going to change. And I cannot say that eating sugar causes it. I'm not saying that, but we do know that type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, so chronically high insulin, even if your blood sugar is normal, these are two of the biggest risk factors for Alzheimer's. And it's we know that type 2 diabetes really affects the whole body. It's not just a blood sugar thing, but the effects of the chronically high blood sugar really touch every organ, every gland, your skin, your eyes, and it just nothing is spared. And so, of course, the brain is affected, but no one was really talking about this until just a few years ago. The brain is not immune to all of these damaging effects from the blood sugar and the chronically high insulin. So, and there's, so many other things that can contribute to cognitive decline, like a B12 deficiency, untreated or improperly treated hypothyroidism, and of course, certain statin drugs can cause memory problems. But we act now. There's so much we don't know about Alzheimer's. There's a lot that we still don't understand, but we cannot keep ignoring the connections between metabolism or metabolic health and Alzheimer's disease. Again, this chronically high insulin. It's when I wrote my first book called The Alzheimer's Antidote about this topic. And when I first started looking at the research, I was blown away at the fact that this is everywhere in the medical literature. This is well known, I think. And yet, if you go, for example, in the US to the Alzheimer's Association's website, there's not a single mention of this whatsoever. There's no mention of what they call reduced brain glucose metabolism. It's crickets. It's silence. So it's mind-boggling is the best word. It's mind-boggling to wonder why this isn't talked about more widely. If you walk into a neurology office with suspected Alzheimer's, I feel like the first thing they should do is give you a Kraft test, maybe.
Tell us more about the Kraft test.
The Kraft test is named for Dr. Joseph Kraft, who I believe is the one who pioneered its use. And it's an oral glucose tolerance test, but instead of only testing your glucose, they test your insulin. And the normal OGTT is a 2-hour test. The Kraft test is extended to 5 hours. And by doing that, by looking at a longer period of time and especially measuring the insulin, you get a wealth of information and data that you don't get from a standard glucose test. And Dr. Kraft is really the one who uncovered this huge epidemic of people who had perfectly normal glucose and even a perfectly normal A1C, but their insulin was through the roof. And they had cardiovascular disease, they had hypertension, they had all these other things that nobody could really explain. Nobody was looking at insulin.
Right. That is exactly what happened to my father. So all his life, he presented with all of the symptoms of diabetes, and he had a great A1C. I mean, it was not great. It was 5.5, 5.4, 5.3, like not on any doctor's radar. He had a double amputation. He went blind in one eye. He had heart disease. He eventually developed colon cancer, but he kept going to the doctor and he's like, you're good. 3 heart attacks. You're good. Your A1Cs. You're like, it's not your diet. It's just bad luck. It's not. And now I know, no way. I kept thinking, why did he present like a diabetic all these years? But they were never testing for insulin. And if I have this correct, Amy, and correct me, if I'm wrong, that your A1C can look like, hey, you're in range. You got no problems with your blood sugar because you've got a really great pancreas that is shooting out, God, plenty of insulin. So it's keeping your blood sugar down. And so the A1C looks like you're normal, everything's fine, but you have these really high insulin levels that mask this chronic elevated insulin problem.
That I think that is absolutely true.
Okay.
I think that is beyond speculation. I think, and even Dr. Kraft, for those interested, he has a book. It's a little skinny book. You could read it in a day. It's called Diabetes Epidemic and You. And it's all about this insulin. So he ran thousands and thousands of these tests over several years. And he has a quote. I'm very sorry to hear about your father. Dr. Kraft has a quote in his book that's something like, those with cardiovascular disease not associated with diabetes are simply undiagnosed, meaning that the diabetes is undiagnosed. Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
that, yeah.
Oh,
And this is huge. I suspect your audience probably is familiar with this concept, but how many people are out there living with all of these unexplained problems, even skin tags. A lot of skin conditions can come from chronically high insulin, a lot of infertility, especially, driven by PCOS. And it's just that a lot of doctors still are not taught this. It's still not
it's not
widely
even
known outside our community, I think.
tested for. Like, even if I went into my doctor to say, hey, could you do an insulin test for me? They'd be like, yeah, no, your A1C is just fine, Florence. You're good. I'm not wasting money on that.
Right.
No, don't worry. Just, you might be saving my life, but don't worry. I don't need to be a bother.
And it's a cheap test. It's not even expensive.
Really? I didn't even know that. Oh, so frustrating. Well, we're going to win this battle, because thank you for this information. Amy, there's lots of people who don't know that. Yeah. They look at their A1C, they think I'm good. My doctor says I'm not even pre-diabetic, or maybe I'm just a little bit pre-diabetic, but they have no idea that potentially you have a rock star pancreas. You do have a great pancreas that is absolutely overdoing its job there, and it's going to burn out at some point. I remember doing an interview years ago, 2, 3, 4 years ago now, with Dr. Richard Cantley, who has the interesting claim to fame of being one of the most medically, financially backed doctors on the planet. Like, he has had millions and tens of thousands of millions of dollars go into his labs. And he said on my interview, who's talking about the link between sugar and cancer. And he said, sugar causes cancer. And I paused the recording. I said, Dr. Cantley, I'm going to be airing this to about 25,000 people. I said, do you want to soften that? And he goes, no. He said, no, I don't. And I can prove to you how sugar causes cancer. He goes, but let me make one caveat. It's not sugar. Sugar causes the insulin spike, and it's the insulin that causes cancer. He said, I cannot make a cell have cancer unless I introduce insulin. Insulin is what turns on the cancer. And insulin's been flying under the radar. We keep looking at blood sugars, which is good, but it's this silent insulin piece that we're not testing for and we don't understand.
Yeah, I am familiar with Dr. Cantley. I've never heard him speak quite that forthrightly, but that says a lot, I think.
Yeah, he's like, I will go on record. I can prove it. I will back that by science. And thank you for the tens of millions of dollars that I've got that have been able, to give me that confidence in that statement. And he said, you couldn't pay me to put sugar in my body. You couldn't pay me. Pretty powerful. With respect to, before people have Alzheimer's and dementia, there's often, lots of people complain about brain fog. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, we know that for many people, like, there's always exceptions, but for many people, going on a very low carb or ketogenic diet makes brain fog disappear. And we could speculate as to why, but some of it is probably the production of ketones, which can fuel the brain. So here you have an extra little fuel supply for the brain. And it may also be that when your blood sugar is more steady, like it is on a lower carb diet, and you're not having these wild ups and downs all day, maybe that allows the brain to use even the glucose more effectively. So you're basically getting two fuels now. And I also wonder, and I don't know if anyone is looking into this specifically, but is brain fog a very, very early indicator that there is a fuel problem in the brain already, even at a younger age. Now, we know that that is the case in mild cognitive impairment, which is the precursor. It's sort of like stage 1 or early Alzheimer's, if you will, that's the sort of precursor to it. But what if brain fog, and I'm not saying brain fog is the precursor to mild cognitive impairment, because even, teenagers get brain fog, but to me, that is a sign that the brain is not getting what it needs to be firing on all cylinders. And I think that for some people, that happens regularly. That's just a normal part of their life. They have to read the same paragraph 4 times before it really sinks in, or they just, start to drift off. And I just think it's, again, like I got into low carb because of weight loss. I never had brain fog, but I understand what it is. And it's fascinating to me that you just change what you eat, and it has such a beneficial impact on so many things.
Totally. I probably shouldn't share this story, but I was in yoga this morning, crack of dawn, and we had a new substitute yoga teacher who's probably mid-20s. And I thought, oh, how fun. Oh my gosh, she'll probably kick my butt. I'll probably come out of the yoga class wanting a nap, but she didn't. And she was struggling with left to right and remembering. And it wasn't just that she was new. It wasn't just that she was young. I could clearly see she was struggling with brain fog. She kept apologizing, and you could see she was trying to capture words. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's so sad when you can see in 20-year-olds, right? You could see the skin tags, you could see the dark and sort of like the indications. If you know what you're looking for, you can begin to see there's a dietary impact happening here. And I felt so sad. These 20-year-olds are walking around with stuff that 60-year-olds used to complain about.
Yeah. But again, like I said earlier, I don't want to terrify people. An occasional moment of that is, you walk into a room and you forget what you went in there for. When it's occasional, that's fine. I think that's normal. Normal's not a great word, but I think that's just part of the human experience. Yeah. But when it happens a lot, when it's kind of more than it should be, and you're starting to get a little bit concerned, then you need to evaluate what's going on. But I don't want someone to think, if they just, sometimes you can't remember a word or you forget somebody's name. Don't freak out if that just happens once in a while.
Totally. Yes. It's when it's impairing work or chronically sort of frustrating you yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I mean, when it's happening so often that you notice it, and it's like, oh, I think there may be an issue here.
Totally. With respect to ketosis, I remember interviewing Megan Ramos on the last summit. She was talking about one of her superstars on her team of people who coach through the fasting method, is a woman who's whole food plant-based. And she said, I have never seen anybody, although she's known among the coaches as she gets in and out of ketosis like nobody's business. She is the queen of ketosis. She can move from whole carbs into ketosis like that. So I think it's helpful for people to let's talk a bit more about keto, because I think people think, oh God, it's a big burger with cheese and bacon and guacamole on top and maybe crumbled pork rinds, and that's dinner. I mean, it's just, there's such a misunderstanding about what keto is. Could you tell us more about keto?
Yeah, so ketosis is a metabolic state. It's not a property of a food. So when someone says carrots aren't keto or that food isn't keto, that's just a falsehood, because no food is keto. Your body is ketogenic in that it generates ketones. And we do that primarily when insulin is very low. It prompts a shift in your metabolism from burning mostly glucose for fuel to burning mostly fat. And when you're metabolizing a lot of fat, some of it kind of spills over and gets converted into ketones. And so some people, everybody differs in the amount of carbohydrate they can consume and be in a ketogenic state. Some people have to be ultra low all the time. Some people have a lot more wiggle room. They can have a lot more carbohydrate. And like you said, of this example from this person in Megan Ramos's group, some people can sort of cycle in and out very easily. Ideally, that's the point we all get to, where you don't quote unquote need a ketogenic diet, where you feel equally well physically, mentally, cognitively, emotionally. You feel equally well whether you eat higher carbs or whether you eat lower carbs. But a lot of us are not there. We have a lifetime of diabetes, of overeating, of all kinds of other stuff that we might require a stricter diet now than somebody else does. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. But ketosis, also, the thing is, not everybody needs to be in ketosis all the time. Like it really depends on what somebody's trying to accomplish, what their situation is. Some people do actually require the ketones, and that could be some people with psychiatric issues. I mean, there's a really promising area of research now called metabolic psychiatry, where they're looking at strict ketogenic diets for schizophrenia, bipolar, major depression, anxiety. And it's just really encouraging. And so those people might actually require a certain amount of ketones to keep their brain where it needs to be for their mood stabilization and all that. You don't need to be in ketosis 24/7 to lose weight or to reverse diabetes or to accomplish a lot of other things. So it's the goal. The goal is not to be in ketosis. The goal is to feel well. The goal is to have your body be operating as best it can under your individual circumstances. So I don't like for people to get too obsessed over their ketone level. But that being said, some people feel their best in ketosis. That's when they have their most physical energy, the sharpest thinking. And for some people, I'm starting to see this more and more. You probably see it, especially with your area of expertise, that some people find that what they call the brain chatter about food is quietest when they're in ketosis. That, like, when they're actually in ketosis, that's when the sugar cravings go away. That's when their appetite is very well controlled. So whether or not someone, quote unquote, needs ketosis really depends on their situation and how they respond when they are versus aren't in that state.
Right. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that explanation. Yeah, it's not about the food. Like, just to reiterate, it's not about eating all the burgers and bacon you think you can eat. It's really about whether or not you're able to be metabolically flexible enough to burn carbs and to burn ketones and to figure out what works best for your body. But there's a lot of people that won't even listen to keto. They have this whole idea that it's extreme and it's dangerous and you're going to get a heart attack, and because they just think bacon. And that's crazy, because fasting can put you into ketosis. You can eat, whole foods, one meal, fast 6, 7, 8 hours for some people, and drop into ketosis. Your body's burning fat and you feel bright and sharp and alive and happy in a way that you don't, and you won't experience unless you have an open mind and at least give your version of keto a try. And I like how Dr. Berg says, okay, all the veggies you want, low carb, protein, modest protein, 3 to 5 ounces, 6, sometimes depends, and, serving a fat or two, and just done. Just like, stop. Stop making it more complicated, thinking, oh, well, the carrot, oh gosh, I had 6 blueberries and oh my God, right? This is the keto crazy part. Talk about that. This is probably exactly why you do what you do.
Yeah, I see. I think that keto should enhance your life. Keto should not become your life. If your entire life revolves around weighing and measuring your food and tracking every little thing you can, and literally being terrified to make a dietary misstep, then that's not what we're trying to accomplish, right? We want you to feel better. We want you, what keto or any other way of eating for that matter, if it works for you, what it should do is enhance your life and allow you to go do the things you want to do. It should help you become physically and psychologically and cognitively able to go participate in the world. And if you're so worried about food and you're so scared of what somebody might give you food wise or what's available, that you just box yourself in, that's the opposite of what we want. And like you said, keto, if somebody wants to eat burger patties and bacon, that's, you can do that, that's fine. But you can also enjoy a wealth of all kinds of other food on a low carb or ketogenic diet, again, depending on your own personal carbohydrate threshold. So it's, what happens, unfortunately, is that people turn this into a religion. And there are no commandments in keto. No one has come down from on high with a stone tablet saying, thou shalt eat this and shall not eat that. It's just, I just, when this is done properly, you shouldn't have to micromanage it to that extent. You shouldn't have to track everything and weigh everything and measure everything and worry about all the math and all the data. If somebody wants to do that and they genuinely enjoy it, that's fine. There's nothing against it. But I think some people think they have to, and they start out really hard, really, they're excited and they're doing everything, and they burn out because it's just so tedious. And if they knew that most people don't have to do that. Now, if I get a client and they're really struggling and it's a mystery, then yeah, now it's time to track. It's time to start really getting some data and let's see what's going on. But I prefer for people to do this as hands off, so to speak, as low tech and as simply as possible until we get to a point where we need to hunker down and do some tinkering. I just think that, like you said, when people think that keto is just endless burgers and cheese and bacon, they also think, well, now I need a ketone meter and I need a glucometer and I need a step monitor and I need all these things. And I think that's very off-putting when most people are going to go really far just cutting carbs a bit, not a bit, but like cutting carbs extensively. They might not need a strict ketogenic diet.
And yeah, and if we just start with all the processed stuff and then look at the grains and then maybe the high sugar fruits, and if you pull those out as an experiment and see how you do, you can always add them back in, right? You can always go back. But people often are scared to run this experiment because they've heard the fear mongering around it. Sometimes people go on keto, they're losing weight, they're feeling great, and then they kind of hit a bit of a wall or a plateau, their weight loss stalls, or they stop feeling really great. So this is kind of, I imagine, where you come in and you tinker a bit. What are some of the tinkering you've had to do to help people kickstart weight loss again and to feel good again?
The first thing is to really evaluate the diet. Are they actually eating what they think they're eating? And so this is where that tracking can be helpful. And it doesn't even have to be as detailed as weighing and measuring the food. You could just write down what you're eating. And even the process of writing it down, every single morsel that goes into your mouth, even just the process of writing it down often opens people's eyes and they say, oh, I didn't realize quite how often I was reaching for that one little piece of candy on my coworker's desk or that one extra bite of this. When you really start paying attention, it's, oh, problem solved. I already know what the issue is here. So we look at the diet first. I look first, are we truly low enough carbohydrate that we should be getting the results we want? If someone is very low carb, and I think that carbohydrate isn't the problem, I hate to say this, but sometimes the problem is too much fat. It's actually not true. For everyone thinks that keto is a high fat diet. What it really is low carb. Now, just like we said, everybody is different. Some people thrive with lots and lots of fat. But if you've been eating lots and lots of fat and you are not getting the results you want, especially if that's losing excess body fat, then we have to look at overconsumption of fat. And that's usually in things like heavy cream, butter, cheese, nuts, just mayo, cream cheese, just these things that we tend to overdo. And if it's not the food, I think people really downplay the role of what's called weight positive medications that either make you gain weight or make it much harder to lose any. And then I see this multiple times a week. I see undiagnosed or inadequately treated hypothyroidism. I'm actually working on my next book right now, and it's going to be about thyroid. It's rampant. It is rampant. Now, I have a biased sample because if anyone's coming to me for help, they've already done keto and it's not working. So something's getting in the way. Why isn't this working? Because we're not talking about someone who's just looking to lose 5 or 8 pounds, someone who's really significantly overweight. If they do a low carb diet, the weight, at least initially, should fall off almost without them even trying. Keto is that powerful. If you are, substantially larger, weight really should come off very easily at first. And that'll slow down eventually. But if you're really, truly doing everything right and the weight is not moving, something's wrong. And it's often low thyroid, not always, but I just see that all the time. And I can't diagnose anybody. But I can look for the signs and symptoms and then refer them to somebody.
Interesting. And is there any sense that keto could be hard on the thyroid or low carb could be hard on the thyroid? I've certainly heard that. Do you think there's anything to that idea?
It's a great question because it comes up a lot. How do I get into this? For some people, keto actually helps. For some people that have low thyroid, especially if it's Hashimoto's, the autoimmune low thyroid, keto often helps. And people can actually reduce their medication and eventually stop it. Now, that doesn't always happen, but it does happen sometimes. I don't think that keto causes thyroid problems. You can develop low thyroid on any way of eating when you are not getting enough calories for a long period of time. And I see this, I think, again, in people who are over exercising and under eating. Because women, we've just been made so afraid of food that we don't, and especially the ones that exercise a lot, multiple times a week, really going hard out every time, you have to replenish that. You have to give your body material to recover and rebuild. And when you don't, it's going to slow you down. It's going to force you to slow down because you're going to burn out if it doesn't. And it does that by reducing the metabolic rate via lower thyroid. And but that's not because of keto per se. That could happen on any way of eating. And for some people, keto just satisfies their hunger so well that they undereat without trying. It's almost like they accidentally undereat. So keto, I don't think that keto is harmful for the thyroid. I think that certain lifestyle practices can influence these hormones, and keto is not the only one.
Right.
But just for anyone listening, like, again, the book is not going to be done anytime soon, and we don't have a title, so I can't tell you what to look for. But if you have been told that your thyroid is normal, yet you are really, really having a hard time losing weight, and you have some other symptoms like hair loss, constipation, depression, low sex drive, feeling cold all the time, there's a lot of symptoms. You need to have a comprehensive thyroid panel. You cannot rely on the TSH alone, which is the only test that a lot of doctors will run. It's exactly like we were talking about earlier with somebody's, looks perfectly healthy because their blood sugar is normal, but their insulin is super high. And if somebody would only look at that, they would have an explanation for all of these health problems. The same thing happens in thyroid, where they only look at the TSH. Oh, well, that's normal. It's not your thyroid. Well, there's 4 or 5 other thyroid-related hormones that should be tested to identify an issue. And it's just unfortunate. It's just simply not the standard way it's done. So you have to find someone who is savvy with thyroid. But I welcome, and anyone is welcome to contact me if they want more information on that, because I see it all the time.
Yes. And stress, the thyroid's so sensitive to stress too. And I can imagine that diet gets blamed when it's like, oh, are you getting to bed on time? Do you have downtime? Do you feel overwhelmed all the time? Like, what about
it's definitely not only the diet.
Totally. Tell us a little bit about what a day-to-day diet, keto diet might look like. Like, where would you start somebody? Because often they're like, well, I don't know. I've heard I shouldn't eat too much protein. And then others have said, oh, no, I've been told I could eat 8 ounces every meal. And there's confusion there too.
Yeah, I work closely with Dr. Eric Westman from Duke University, who's like an OG, a keto OG. He's been doing this a long, long time, and we use his food list, which is 20 total grams of carbohydrate or fewer, which is pretty strict.
Very.
Because when I say total grams, that means you don't subtract fiber. So that doesn't leave you a lot of wiggle room, even for things like broccoli and spinach and mushrooms. Those carbs add up pretty quickly when you're counting the total amount. So it's very limited in carbs. The fat that comes with the protein food is basically unlimited within reason. So you can eat a fatty steak, you can eat a fatty pork chop. You don't have to drain the fat off of your meats. But we do tell people to limit the added fats and oils like the butter, the heavy cream, the mayo. These are the things that tend to stall people in weight loss. And the protein, we say that the zero carb foods like a piece of beef, a piece of chicken, a piece of fish, these are, I don't know if we actually use the word unlimited. We might say eat as much as you like until you're comfortably full. And if we ever do say unlimited, I always say within reason, assuming you're not going to eat 6 pounds of steak in a day. So, but that's how we start people off. The main thing is get those carbs ultra low and the reason we tell everyone to be that strict at first is because we know some people can have more carbs. But at that strict a level, everybody's probably going to get into ketosis and going to feel the full benefit, the full effect of what we're trying to do. And once they stay there for a little bit, then they can experiment with reintroducing some things and see if they can still feel equally good eating a more diverse diet or eating a little bit more carbohydrate. But we try to keep it dead simple. We don't really do recipes or meal plans. We give people a food list, but you are free to customize within that list. So if you eat kosher, if you're allergic to dairy, if you don't eat pork, like whatever it may be, you can totally customize and personalize your diet within that list. And the reason now, meal plans and recipes are helpful. There's a million of them online. But the reason we don't do meal plans is because we prefer to show people how easy and enjoyable it can be to eat this way without a plan. Fatty chunk of protein, non-starchy vegetable, you're good. It doesn't have to be, well, I have to have 2 ounces of this and 4 micrograms of that. And that again is people have busy lives. Keto should not be a full-time job. It should not feel like a chore. It shouldn't feel like a burden. It should be enjoyable. So we just try to keep it simple, as simple as we can.
Okay, got it. And so people can this is a crazy thing to say, but people try and follow their appetite. They stop when they're full and they eat when they're hungry, and whatever that, if it's 3 meals, if it's 2, it's 4. Or do you recommend that people sort of plan and eat sort of 3 structured meals? And
That's a great question. We tell people to listen to their body, which is not easy for everybody. We know, some of us are so out of touch with our hunger, our true hunger signals. We really do not put the only limits on quantity are the carbs and the added fats. We don't really give any guidelines with respect to eat this many meals or this many snacks. What we do is just tell people stick to the list. If it's not on the list, don't eat it. And what tends to happen is that people eat less and they eat less frequently without even trying. Because after literally like just a few days of being that strict, I know it sounds crazy to someone who hasn't experienced it, but when you eat that little carbohydrate and your whole system sort of switches to this fat burning state, you're just not as hungry and you're not hungry as frequently. So you may eat 1 or 2 meals a day, not because you were deliberately fasting or deliberately only doing that. You just simply weren't hungry. So many of us eat 3 meals a day or snack constantly because we're just so used to, oh, it's lunchtime, time to eat. We never actually ask ourselves, am I hungry, or is it just the clock on the wall tells me it's lunchtime? So once people, we don't enforce any specific fasting. We find that people skip meals just naturally, and which is nice because they end up getting the benefits of fasting without forcing themselves into it, and without I don't believe in enacting arbitrary rules like, oh, it's not 2 p.m. I'm not allowed to eat. Well, if you're really hungry, your body's telling you something, and you shouldn't force yourself to go hungry when you're hungry, and it's, or, oh, my eating window ended, I'm not allowed to eat anymore for the night. It just, that can be helpful. I know that there is a rationale for doing that, but I would rather people adopt that almost naturally rather than forcing themselves into it.
Totally. And if you can't, use the scale till you can, right? Like maybe it's more of a cast or a crutch or something until you have that confidence. Lots of people go lower carb and get very constipated. I'm sure you've heard it. What advice do you give them?
So, two things. The first is, how are we defining constipation? Because it's fairly normal, I think, for you to have fewer bowel movements on a very low carb diet because you're eating a lot less fiber. Where do we find fiber? In plant foods, which all contain carbohydrate. So your fiber intake is naturally going to decrease when you restrict your carbohydrate intake. So with a lot less fiber coming in, you have a lot less indigestible material coming in that needs to be passed out. So I think it is actually normal to have a reduction in your bowel movements, and going less often than you're accustomed to doesn't mean you have constipation. Constipation is if your stools are hard and dry and painful to pass, and when you have a bowel movement, you feel like it didn't empty completely. That's constipation. So if you don't have that, but you're just going less often than you were, but you feel comfortable and you have no problem with bowel movements, then that's not a problem. If you do have actual constipation, then the number one remedy for that is magnesium, just magnesium supplements. I hesitate to give exact numbers, but just, a good magnesium supplement should stop that. And some people, Dr. Atkins recommended psyllium husk dissolved in water, like you drink a glass of, with a spoon of psyllium. If that works for people, that's fine. I don't have anything against whatever people find works. Just make sure, if you're using an over-the-counter laxative, make sure there's no sugar in it. But typically it's magnesium that does the trick.
And can you take magnesium like months and years on end?
As far as I know, yeah, there's no, because what happens if you overdo magnesium is you get loose stools, which, if you have constipation, that's kind of what you're aiming for anyway. You don't want diarrhea. You don't want to go too far in the opposite direction. But as far as I know, there's not really any harm in long-term magnesium supplementation. But of course, for people that can tolerate a little more carbohydrate, if you eat foods sweetened with sugar alcohols, those are notorious for causing loose stools, like the maltitol, mannitol, xylitol. And then for anyone who enjoys MCT oil will also get things moving.
Okay. Awesome. Final question. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this carb quiz that you have, that I did actually to prepare for this interview today. And it was very interesting because I said no to almost everything except I said, yes, I get migraines. I don't get them very often anymore, but I do still get them. And so can you tell us a bit more about that, and how it can help people kind of gauge for themselves whether, how low carb do they need to go to try and turn some of their health conditions around?
Sure. So the book that I co-wrote with Dr. Westman is called End Your Carb Confusion. And we have 3 different levels of carbohydrate intake in that book. And the one that you would start with depends on your current circumstances. And obviously, the sicker you are, the more severe your health issues, the more likely you're going to be pointed to phase 1, which is a strict ketogenic diet. And I'll let you in on a little secret. Most people are going to be pointed there because the quiz is designed, if you have type 2 diabetes or hypertension or PCOS or type 1 diabetes, or you have obesity, and there's a whole other list. I forget even what's on it, but most of those are going to point you to phase 1. And it's the reason for that is kind of what I said before. We know that strict an approach, that powerful an approach, is going to fix most of these things. Not immediately, it's going to take time, but that is going to be effective for reversing the majority of these issues, except type 1. Type 1 diabetics, don't sue me. Like, I know you can't reverse that. But some people might do equally well on phase 2, which is a slightly higher carb intake, but we don't know. We can't predict. So we'd rather that you start at the strictest, feel that full benefit, and then experiment over time with increasing the carb intake, or even maybe increasing the carb intake once in a while. And you eat keto most of the time, but every now and then you have something a little higher. But we point people toward that, not only so they can get the most powerful effect the most quickly, but I think there's people who don't realize how many of the little nagging things they experience every day are connected to this glucose insulin thing we've been talking about. And so many people start a ketogenic diet for weight loss, and they're surprised, like, oh, my skin tags went away, or my PMS is so much better, or my joint pain is gone, my heartburn is gone. And if you just told somebody, if you did keto, your heartburn would disappear, nobody would believe you. They just wouldn't believe you. So we kind of have to nudge people into trying it, almost as a little, I don't know, it's almost like a little sneaky way to get them to do it so that they'll get the results we kind of know they're going to get.
Yeah, got it. Okay. That explains my results. Yes.
Yeah.
So, Amy, are you currently working with people privately? Like, if they want to work with someone one-on-one, are you taking clients right now, or where are you at with that?
I am. I do provide consultations, and people can find that at stallslayer.com. Stallslayer.com. There's a work with me tab. Mm-hmm. But the best place is I help this company, Adapt Your Life Academy, do online courses. And we have a course on keto. We have one on sugar and food addiction. We have one on we're creating one on protein now. We have one on cholesterol. So it's just a wealth of stuff there. So that's adaptyourlifeacademy.com. But I do provide private one-on-one consultations if people want that.
People want to work with you one-on-one. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your expertise, and your hope. It was much appreciated.
Thank you. I hope it's helpful to people out there.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this interview. And before you go, do one more thing. Stop, think back on the interview while it's fresh in your mind, and write down your favorite takeaway in a special dedicated journal. If you do this, at the end of the summit, you'll have a page or two of nuggets of wisdom to guide you forward. And remember, this is just the beginning. At the end of the summit, you'll be invited to attend a free webinar where I will personally summarize the key insights of our speakers and pull it all together into a practical plan of action. You can also check out our Facebook page where you can connect with others and ask questions, and our Kick Sugar Coach podcast and YouTube channel for additional inspiration. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next interview.